Okay, so thanks for having me. I'm going to talk about something a little different than an earth flow. We're going to talk about microseismicity and subduction zones now. And so this is, am I using the right? Sorry. Okay.
This is to move.
Okay. Green to move. Okay, got it. It's two hands, it's a two-hand process. Okay, so we're going to talk about microseismicity and subduction zones. And specifically, if we're thinking about installing something like this notional mega array on some subduction zone somewhere, we want to know that, we're going to spend all this money on it. We want to know that we know how to get as much information out of it as possible. And specifically, I'm going to talk about how we can get as much information about microseismicity, the little earthquakes, using something like this mega array. And so just really quickly, why do we care about capturing little earthquakes in fault zones? Well, we care because these little earthquakes are actually just a really amazing way to kind of like see what's going on in a fault zone. And so this example is, oh wow, actually this, let's see. Sorry, I'm having technological challenges here. Okay, so why do we want to find little earthquakes? Well, the little earthquakes can show us what's going on down there. And so in this example on the left, we're looking at 2 earthquake catalogs from Southern California. And on the top, the earthquake catalog, this is just sort of the standard earthquake catalog from about 10 years. And there's each little dot is an event. And on the bottom, we have an earthquake catalog that has been enhanced using match filter. And you can see that all of a sudden there's tons and tons more seismicity that has happened in this part of Southern California that has been found with advanced methods using exactly the same data. And so you can see that when we have this sort of more high resolution earthquake catalog, all of a sudden all these structures pop out that we couldn't see very well before. And there's simply more earthquakes. There's about an order of magnitude more earthquakes here. And when we have more earthquakes, we also have a better statistical power to see things like changes in seismicity rate or migration of seismicity, or maybe earthquake nucleation, that kind of thing. And so capturing little earthquakes allows us to get a better sense of the structure of these fault zones and the processes that are happening there. And that is potentially really useful, even though these earthquakes are little and we usually don't feel them. So if we as a community are going to try and spend a bunch of time and money installing some big mega array offshore somewhere, or onshore and offshore, we want to know that we know how to get as much microseismicity out of it as possible. And so I'm going to approach this question of, well, what's going to work the best by looking at a recent amphibious seismic deployment that is really quite similar in scale and scope to the phase 1 mega array that is in the cartoon, which of course might change. But we're going to look at the best efforts of my colleagues and I to find microseismicity in the Alaska amphibious community seismic experiment. So this was an amphibious seismic deployment. This is a map on the right. And each circle is one of the seismometers that was part of this experiment. And you can just ignore the colors. But you'll notice that there's a whole bunch of seismometers that are in the ocean. So there were 75 ocean bottom seismometers and a densified land network. And this seismic network recorded for about 15 months. And the station spacing is really pretty similar to what is sort of notionally described for phase 1 of mega array. And it's a scientifically interesting place where we cross some pretty amazing variability in mega thrust properties. And so I'm going to show you what it looks like when we try and get microseismicity out of this really pretty awesome seismic network offshore Alaska. Okay, so the first thing that happened was that Natalia Rupert at the Alaska Earthquake Center and some of her analysts spent many months sort of using traditional methods to create an earthquake catalog. They looked at each pick and adjusted it and made sure it was real and relocated everything. And at the end of that process, they created an earthquake catalog with about 7,200 events in it. That's shown over here on the right. Each dot is an earthquake colored by depth. And that catalog turned out to be about 30% more earthquakes than we were able to find, they were able to find using just land data prior to ACE. So just simply having OBS, we get about 30% more earthquakes with sort of traditional methods. So maybe we can get more if we use some more advanced techniques. So the first thing that I'm going to show you is an effort to find more seismicity using match filter. So match filter is the pretty common earthquake detection technique where you take an earthquake that you know exists, these red waveforms, and you just scan it through the data to find similar waveforms, and you know that there's another earthquake, the data. And match filter is actually the technique that was used in that figure from early in the talk in Southern California, where they were able to find an order of magnitude more events. So it has the potential to be very powerful. Susan Schwartz and her student Glenn Nelson have taken some of those hand-checked earthquakes in the catalog, roughly 2,000 of them, and they're sort of chosen to target the megathrust and scanned them through the data to find repeat events. And what they were able to find about exactly 265 more earthquakes, which is about a 10% increase in seismicity catalog for this area using match filter. So that's kind of a modest increase. It's nowhere near as good as they were able to do in Southern California, for example, but there's some pretty good reasons for that. Mostly that this experiment was a lot shorter in duration, so there are fewer templates, and the stations are a lot further apart. So this is another kind of modest increase in microseismicity. So fortunately, there's been sort of an explosion in recent years of machine learning and deep learning in seismology. And there's all these really pretty powerful ways to detect earthquakes that no longer rely on finding earthquakes that look the same. And so there's a lot of these techniques that use convolutional neural networks and really large training data sets of known earthquakes to train these convolutional neural networks to find earthquake signals that they just look kind of like earthquakes that it's seen before. They look like earthquake-like energy. They don't necessarily have to match like they did with match filter. And so these earthquake detection and picking algorithms use the same basic machinery that my phone uses when I type dog into my photo album, and it comes up with all these pictures of my dog. So we're gonna exploit some of these existing algorithms to see if we can find more microseismicity in the ACE network. By the way, ACE is our cute little nickname for the Alaska Amphibious Community Seismic Experiment. So that's what I'm talking about. So this is just like a bunch of papers that use deep learning to do stuff with earthquake data. But we're gonna look mostly at what I've been able to do with Earthquake Transformer, which is a algorithm that detects and picks earthquakes. And it was trained on 1 million waveforms and 300,000 noise waveforms. And it can pick P waves and S waves. And when I take Earthquake Transformer, just the model that it's shipped with, and I apply it to the data from the ACE project from this network in Alaska, I'm able to find about 40% more events than were in that human checked catalog that the Alaska Earthquake Center made. So over here on the right, we're looking at sort of the western part of the network, and the black circles are earthquakes that were in the human checked catalog, and the orange circles that I hope you can see are earthquakes that were newly found by Earthquake Transformer. So again, this is kind of a moderate increase in seismicity that we found in this region. But it kind of like doesn't compare to some of the previous work that's been done with machine learning, where they find an order of magnitude more events. So we're kind of thinking, well, why can't we find more earthquakes here? And I think it's because when Earthquake Transformer was trained, it had never seen ocean bottom seismic data before. So it has a bunch of land data in its data set, but it has never seen data underwater. It doesn't know what underwater earthquakes look like. So going back to the dog in my phone analogy, it's as though the phone has seen a bunch of pictures of dogs on land, but has never seen pictures of dogs underwater. So we don't know what the dogs underwater look like, and it can't find them very well. So we need to fix our training data set to work on amphibious networks. So the last thing I did was I created a new amphibious training data set from that hand-picked catalog that was very carefully made by the Alaska Earthquake Center. And that new training data set has 175,000 new waveforms in it. and 53,000 of them are from ocean bottom data, which Earthquake Transformer has never seen before. And so I took that Earthquake Transformer model and I used transfer learning to retrain it on data from both land and ocean, seismic data, not dogs, using SeisBench. And then I applied those two separate models to the land and ocean bottom data separately. And when I do that, I am able to find 100% more earthquakes in this sort of western region of ACE. So I was able to double the catalog. And these are really preliminary results at the moment, but I actually expect that as I tune this method further, we'll find more and not fewer earthquakes. So when we use machine learning, these advanced machine learning methods, and have an appropriate training data set to start with, we can definitely find more microseismicity in this offshore, onshore seismic network that's kind of similar to mega array. And then kind of from a sort of scientific perspective, the orange dots again are the new ones. And as we sort of fill in this map with new microseismicity that we're detecting with machine learning, the seismicity patterns really kind of remain the same. We have more earthquakes, but they're still densely distributed in certain places and not in other places. So I'm not going to go into what we see in this catalog here, just this is sort of preliminary. This is just to say, like, yes, machine learning does get us more microseismicity. I wanted to point out that there is, if you are working on something with ocean bottom seismic data and you're encountering problems that your machine learning algorithms don't know what it looks like, there is a new global OBS training data set being created by a group in Europe called PicBlue. The Alaska amphibious data set will be part of this. And there's a poster at EGU if you're interested in it. Check it out. Okay, and so just to quickly summarize what I've shown you. So we have the Alaska Amphibious Community Seismic Experiment, ACE, really similar in scope and scale to the proposed mega array. What kind of microseismicity can we find if we look at this network? So with sort of traditional human intensive methods, we're able to find about 30% more earthquakes in this network than were in the catalog developed just with land data. Then when we try to match filter, we don't find a ton more, we find about 10% more earthquakes. And finally, when we modernize our techniques and we use deep learning based detection, these globally trained picking models can find about 40% more earthquakes. And then when we retrain the globally trained models with local data, they work a lot better and we're able to double the catalog. A couple of limitations that I sort of encountered throughout this process. Obviously, we need an appropriate training data set for these machine learning methods. We need to have dogs underwater as well as on land for an amphibious seismic network. And then this ACE is, it's most of it's underwater. So marine noise remains kind of an issue. A lot of the little earthquakes are similar in amplitude to some of the noises in the ocean. So that's maybe something that's like a technical challenge we could think about addressing in the future. And then the station spacing. These stations are something like 40 to 70 kilometers apart. And so little earthquakes just don't show up at multiple stations very well. But nevertheless, when we adapt our workflows to amphibious networks, we are able to find a lot more earthquakes. So that gives me hope that we can find lots of seismicity. Okay, thank you. That's all I have.